paper rustling, the sharp, sterile bite of rubbing alcohol hitting the back of my throat. The fluorescent light overhead flickers once, just once. Then it settles back into that flat, shadowless white glare. My right hand rests on my heavy stomach. A soft kick against my lower rib. A morning habit. The blood pressure cuff hisses, deflating. One beat at a time. Cold ultrasound gel still clings to my skin. None of this makes sense. I am Claire, 38 years old. A public high school English teacher. 8 months pregnant with my first child. This is a Tuesday morning. 9:30. A routine prenatal visit. It is supposed to be routine. It isn't. The plastic bottle sits on the metal counter next to my purse. A standard pharmacy label. White cap. Olive green capsules inside. I took the last one this morning. Swallowed it with orange juice standing in my kitchen right before my husband Trent left for the bank. Gloria brought the new bottle last week. She told me she got them from her guy. Pharmaceutical grade, she said, not that drugstore junk. I didn't ask who her guy was. I didn't read the label. I trusted her. Dr. Okonkwo turns the page on her clipboard. Slower than usual. Much slower. She turns it again. A third time. She is reading the exact same page over and over. Everything okay, I ask. I keep my voice light. Baby's kicking up a storm in there. Dr. Okonkwo doesn't look up. Claire, I want to ask you about your supplements. Oh, the prenatal vitamins. My mother-in-law handles those. She used to be a pharmacy tech. The clipboard goes down. The doctor looks at me. Really looks at me. Who specifically refills them for you, Gloria? I answer. My mother-in-law. Why? 3 seconds pass. The doctor places both hands flat on the desk, palms down, fingers straight, the posture of a woman weighing every single syllable. I'm going to ask you to leave the vitamin bottle here today, and I'd like you to come back Thursday for a follow-up. Can you do that? I don't understand. The words don't fit together, but something in the way she ignores my question makes the baby kick again. A hard jab against my ribs, like she feels it too. The doctor ran extra blood panels last month. She mentioned it casually. Just to be thorough, she had said. I nodded. I trusted her. My hand grips my purse strap as I walk out of the clinic. The familiar weight of the vitamin bottle is gone. My knuckles turn white. I realize something then. For the first time in 5 months, the doctor didn't smile and say everything looks great. She didn't mention the test results at all. She only asked about the vitamins. I sit in my car for 4 minutes before starting the engine. My hand rests on my stomach. The baby is quiet now. I call Gloria. It is a habit after every appointment. How'd it go, sweetheart? Baby growing strong? Her voice is sweet, dripping with southern sugar. Yeah, everything's fine. I lie to the woman I call Mama G for the very first time. I don't even know why I'm doing it. I drive home, but I pull into a drugstore parking lot on the way. I don't go inside. I just sit in the driver's seat and stare through the glass doors. The place that sells the garbage vitamins Gloria refused to let me take. My throat tastes like ash. A tiny question plants itself in my mind. As small as an olive green capsule, Gloria brings a casserole to the house that afternoon. Chicken pot pie, her late husband's recipe. She wears a mint green blouse and sharply creased beige trousers. Her platinum blonde hair sits in a perfect bouffant, not a single strand out of place. She doesn't knock. She walks right into my kitchen because she copied the key months ago. You look tired, honey. Did the doctor say anything? Gloria opens the refrigerator and starts rearranging the shelves to make room. Just the usual. Baby's healthy. Good. I'll bring more vitamins Friday. You're almost out. Actually. I pause. The doctor kept my bottle today. For testing or something. The casserole dish stops in midair. Just for a second. Then Gloria places it gently on the bottom shelf. Testing. What kind of testing? I breathe in. Her gardenia perfume fills the small kitchen. Heavy and thick. I used to think that smell meant safety. Today it suffocates me. I tell her I don't know. I don't see her eyes narrow. I don't see the calculation in her stare. I only see her close the refrigerator door and smile. She pats my cheek and leaves, but when her car door shuts in the driveway, the smile drops. She pulls out her phone. She doesn't call me. She calls Trent. The sweet southern drawl vanishes. Her voice goes flat and hard. We need to talk. Tonight. Wednesday afternoon. I stop by Gloria's house to return the empty casserole dish. She stands in her kitchen. A laptop is open on the island counter. I catch a glimpse of the screen as I set the dish down. Small text. Pictures of herbal supplements. An active shopping cart. She snaps the laptop shut. Not panicked, but deliberate. Smooth. Just paying some bills, honey. I don't think much of it at the time. Mama G, the doctor wants me to try a different vitamin brand for a few weeks. Something about the formula. A thin smile stretches across her perfectly painted lips. Oh, honey, doctors change their minds every 5 minutes. But sure, whatever she says, I just want what's best for my grandbaby. My grandbaby. The possession in her voice is absolute. A week ago, those words would have warmed my heart. Now the kitchen feels 10 degrees colder. I drive back to my house. 8 o'clock passes, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Trent isn't home. I call him. Voicemail. I text him. The read receipt appears, but no reply comes. This has never happened in 2 years of marriage. I lie in bed. My hand rests on my stomach. The baby kicks in the dark. For the first time since I moved into this place I call home, I feel completely and utterly alone. The long night finally gave way to Thursday morning. I drove to the clinic with a heavy knot sitting just behind my ribs. They did not put me in the regular exam room today. There were no bright pregnancy magazines waiting on my lap, and I heard no cheerful laughter drifting over from the reception desk. Instead, the nurse led me straight into a private consultation room. The leather guest chair felt cold against my skin. My bare legs stuck to the material because I had worn a simple cotton dress to beat the Georgia heat. The wall clock ticked with a heavy mechanical rhythm. I sat there and counted 47 beats before the door opened. A faint smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted in from the hallway. It was an ordinary morning smell inside a room that suddenly felt entirely wrong. The overhead light in here was different from the rest of the clinic. It glowed with a warm yellow hue. It was the kind of soft lighting people deliberately choose when they need to deliver terrible news. Dr. Okonkwo walked in carrying a thick manila folder. She usually carried a thin plastic clipboard. She closed the door firmly behind her. She sat down across from me and did not open the folder right away. She folded her hands on the desk. She asked if anyone had come with me today. I told her I was alone. She opened the folder, and her eyes stayed on the paperwork for a long moment. She said the results from the extended toxicology panel were back, both the sample they took in July and the one from yesterday. I nodded and said okay. She kept her voice incredibly steady. She told me she found a compound called blue cohosh in my bloodstream. She stated the levels were consistent with regular oral ingestion over several weeks. I automatically wrapped my arms around my stomach. I told her I did not understand what that was. Dr. Okonkwo leaned forward. She explained it was an herbal substance. She said that historically people used it to induce contractions and terminate a pregnancy. She told me it was not approved by any medical board, and it was certainly not included in any prenatal vitamin formula she knew of. I sat frozen. The wall clock kept ticking. I counted the beats, but I did not want to hear them anymore. She looked directly into my eyes. She said someone had been putting this substance in whatever I was taking. She told me this did not get into my system by accident. A heavy silence fell between us. 5 long seconds passed. I finally whispered the word vitamins. I whispered Gloria's name. Dr. Okonkwo did not blink. She said she had documented everything. The chain of custody on both blood samples was completely intact. She wanted me to understand exactly what that meant. It meant she held evidence. My body reacted before my mind could process the horror of her words. My hands turned to ice. The cold spread outward from my bones, chilling my chest and freezing my throat. The baby delivered a sharp, frantic kick against my ribs, and it felt like she knew exactly what was happening to us. I looked down at my round belly. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Someone had actively tried to kill my child. The woman I affectionately called Mama G had smiled in my kitchen, touched my shoulder, and handed me poison. The doctor spoke quietly, explaining that my baby was safe for now. The current concentration of the herb was not enough to cause a loss at 8 months. However, she said it perfectly explained the unexplained uterine irritability she had noted during my July visit. She warned me that if I had continued taking it, the risk of premature labor and severe bleeding would have grown exponentially. She had already contacted the local hospital to set up a strict monitoring plan for the rest of my pregnancy. Dr. Okonkwo closed the thick folder. She asked the one question I never thought I would hear. She asked if I felt safe at home. 2 days ago, my answer would have been an immediate yes. Now I looked down at my hands, resting on my stomach, protecting the life growing inside me. I realized I did not know the answer at all. I walked out to my car and sat behind the steering wheel. I did not put the key in the ignition. I just stared at the empty plastic bottle of orange juice resting in the cup holder. I drank my vitamins with orange juice every single morning. Gloria had suggested it. She told me fresh orange juice hides the vitamin smell so much better. The memory of her sweet voice echoed in my head. I understood it now. She needed to hide the smell of the herbs. I pushed the car door open, leaned over the hot asphalt, and threw up until my stomach was completely empty. I went back to the house that evening. Trent was already home. He sat on the living room sofa watching a sports broadcast on television. An open can of Sweetwater 420 beer rested on the coffee table. Everything looked so perfectly normal. I looked at him and wondered for the very first time if he knew. The sports commentator shouted excitedly about a football game neither of us cared about. The smell of the bitter beer hung in the heavy air. The old sofa springs let out a familiar creak as I sat down next to him. We had talked about replacing that couch a month ago. Blue and white light from the television screen flickered across his face. I did not scream. I did not confront him immediately. I just leaned my head against his shoulder. He kissed the top of my hair out of pure habit. It was a normal Thursday night for him, but I was searching. I watched his breathing, looking for a sign, a shift, anything that proved he was part of it. He got up to take a shower. He left his phone sitting on the bed. His passcode had been the same for 2 years. It was my birthday. I did not have to hack anything. I just typed in the numbers. I opened his messages. I scrolled past the mundane texts, until I saw a name saved with a pink flower emoji. Amber. I scrolled up from the bottom of their conversation. The messages stretched back for almost a year. They were intimate. They were detailed. They talked every single day. I found an ultrasound picture she had sent him. 4 months along, Trent had replied to the picture. He wrote that she was perfect, just like her mama. I stared at the screen for 3 minutes, and those 3 minutes aged me 3 years. Then I found his conversation thread with Gloria. I scrolled back 2 months. Gloria had sent a text saying I could not have that baby. She told him the timing was wrong and that Amber needed him. Trent had replied with one word, Mom. Gloria wrote back immediately, promising she would handle it and telling him to just keep me calm. Trent had asked what she was going to do. Gloria replied that she would do what she always did. She would take care of things. Trent never responded to that message. He left it on read. He asked no further questions. I set the phone down on the mattress. I did not cry. Crying requires an understanding of your grief, and my brain had not yet caught up to what my eyes had just seen. I existed in that numb space right before the pain hits. My hands were freezing. The baby kicked gently. The sound of running water stopped in the bathroom. Trent stepped out a minute later. He had a towel wrapped around his waist. Water dripped from his wet hair onto his bare shoulders. He saw me sitting on the edge of the bed with his unlocked phone resting beside me. He stopped walking. He asked if everything was okay. I looked up at him. My eyes were completely dry. I asked him who Amber was. Silence filled the room. He stood frozen. His right hand reached up and rubbed the back of his neck. It was a nervous habit he had carried since childhood, a tell he used whenever he lied. Gloria knew about it. Now I knew about it too. He said my name, his voice cracking. I cut him off. I asked him who told his mother to put blue cohosh in my prenatal vitamins. He stayed rooted by the bathroom door. I remained seated on the mattress. There were only 10 feet of hardwood floor between us, but that space held almost a year of infidelity, a tainted bottle of pills, and an unborn child fighting to survive. Trent opened his mouth. No words came out. His silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I used to think his quiet nature brought peace to my life. Standing there watching him fail to defend himself, I finally heard his silence for what it truly was. Complicity. I stood up. I grabbed an overnight bag from the closet. I packed my laptop and my wallet. He asked where I was going. I did not look at him, and I did not answer. I walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove into the night. It was 11 o'clock. I was 8 months pregnant. I had absolutely no idea where I was going, but I knew with total certainty that I would never set foot in that house again. The parking lot of the Walmart out on the highway was practically empty when I finally killed the engine. I leaned the driver's seat as far back as it would go. It was a cold night, the kind of damp Georgia chill that sinks right into the upholstery and settles in your joints. I wrapped my coat around my 8-month belly, trying to find a position that did not pull at my lower back. The baby kicked against my ribs, restless and confused by the cramped space. I placed my hand over the movement, whispering a quiet apology into the dark car. I did not sleep. I watched the fluorescent parking lot lights buzz and flicker until the sky began to turn the color of dirty concrete. When the sun finally broke over the tree line, I picked up my phone. My fingers were stiff from the cold. I opened the browser and typed the words, Default divorce attorney, Macon, Georgia. I scrolled past the sponsored advertisements until I found a description that specifically mentioned domestic abuse and fault-based filings. The name was Lorraine Greer. Her office opened at 8 in the morning. I drove downtown, parked on a side street, and walked 2 blocks to a brick building that looked like it had been standing since the Civil War. The waiting room smelled like old paper and lemon polish. A receptionist with kind eyes offered me water, but I shook my head. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Lorraine Greer. Lorraine looked to be in her mid-50s. She had sharp features, a tailored navy blazer, and a habit of tapping her gold pen against her heavy mahogany desk. 4 taps every minute, a steady, rhythmic sound that replaced the need for her to show any facial expressions. I talked for 22 minutes straight. I did not cry. I did not pause to take a breath. I laid out the prenatal vitamins, the toxicology report from Dr. Okonkwo, the blue cohosh, the text messages I had read on Trent's phone, and the woman named Amber. Lorraine did not interrupt me once. She just kept tapping that gold pen. When I finally finished, the silence in the room felt heavy enough to break the floorboards. She stopped tapping. She leaned forward and rested her forearms on the desk. "Let me make sure I have this exactly right," Lorraine said, her voice carrying a slight raspy edge. "Your mother-in-law put an herbal abortifacient in your prenatal vitamins. Your husband knew about it. You have the medical toxicology report, and you saw text messages directly confirming their conspiracy." "Yes," I answered. My voice sounded hollow, like it belonged to someone else. "Georgia is a one-party consent state," she said. She watched my face closely. "Do you know what that means, Claire?" "No." Lorraine picked up her pen again, but she did not tap it. She pointed it directly at me. "It means starting right now, you record every single conversation you are a part of. Every single one. You do not need their permission. You do not need to tell them you are doing it. If you are in the room and you are part of the conversation, it is perfectly legal for you to hit record." I stared at the brass nameplate on her desk. The reality of what she was asking me to do settled over my shoulders. I was no longer just a pregnant wife, trying to figure out a misunderstanding. I was gathering evidence against the people who were supposed to be my family. Lorraine laid out the strategy with clinical precision. She told me I needed to stay safe. She offered to file a temporary protective order, but she warned me that doing so would immediately alert Gloria and Trent to everything we knew. For the criminal case to hold weight, we needed more than just the blood work. We needed a paper trail. We needed Gloria to admit to what she had done. If we file for a fault-based divorce, citing his adultery, Lorraine explained, Trent is entirely barred from receiving alimony under Georgia law. Furthermore, equitable distribution in this state heavily favors the victim when there is documented marital misconduct and felony-level battery involved. You are the victim of both an affair and a poisoning scheme. The house, the assets, everything will tilt in your favor. But we have to be smart. We have to be quiet. I am going to hire a private investigator to look into this Amber woman and follow the financial trail. I looked down at my hands. I told her I could not go back to that house. I told her I had nowhere else to sleep. Lorraine stood up and walked around her massive desk. She looked at the worn leather sofa sitting against the far wall of her office. "I have had clients sleep on that couch before," she said gently. "It is not comfortable. It will hurt your back. But the door locks from the inside, and it is safe." I slept on that leather couch for the next 2 nights. It smelled like stale coffee and old legal binders. But for the first time in 5 months, I closed my eyes and actually rested. I crossed a threshold in that office. I stopped waiting to be loved, and I started learning how to fight. Sunday morning arrived with a thick, suffocating humidity that clung to the windows of the law office. Lorraine brought me a cup of decaffeinated coffee and a pair of clean clothes she had picked up from a local store. She sat on the edge of her desk and looked at me with a stern expression. "You have to go back to church today," she said. I stopped holding the coffee cup halfway to my mouth. I told her I could not do that. I told her I could not look at that woman and pretend everything was fine. "You have to," Lorraine insisted. "Do not let her know you know. Not yet. Go to church. Smile at her. Let her think everything is exactly the way she planned it. The moment she realizes you are onto her, she will destroy the evidence. She will rally the community against you. You have to play the devoted, naive daughter-in-law for just a little while longer." An hour later, I was walking up the wide stone steps of First Baptist Macon. The heavy wooden doors stood open, spilling the sound of the organ out into the muggy morning air. The sanctuary smelled of melting floor wax, old hymnals, and the faint, powdery scent of expensive perfumes. Gloria was standing in the foyer. She wore a pastel pink dress with a matching silk scarf draped over her shoulder. Her platinum hair caught the light from the stained glass windows. As soon as she saw me, her face broke into a wide, radiant smile. It was the exact same smile she had worn in my kitchen when I told her the doctor took my vitamins. "Oh, look who is here," Gloria practically sang, reaching out to grasp both of my hands. "You look wonderful, sweetheart. That grandbaby is going to come out just gorgeous." She pulled me close and kissed my cheek. The overwhelming stench of her gardenia perfume filled my nose, making my stomach roll. I forced the corners of my mouth up. I smiled. I nodded. I let her link her arm through mine and lead me down the center aisle toward the family pew. I sat through the entire service, but I did not hear a single word of the sermon. For the very first time in 2 years, I actually observed my mother-in-law. I watched the way she controlled the space around her. I noticed how she decided who sat where. I watched her greet the other women, always placing her hand lightly on their arms, establishing dominance disguised as affection. Whenever someone asked about me, she never introduced me as Claire. She always said, "This is Trent's wife." Possessive. She was entirely possessive of her son, of her reputation, and of the narrative she had carefully constructed for 15 years. The pastor stood at the pulpit and read from the scripture. He spoke about how the truth shall set you free. Right as he said the word truth, the baby kicked hard against my pelvis. I placed my hand on my stomach and took a slow, deep breath. After the service, the congregation poured out into the baking heat of the asphalt parking lot. Gloria stood near her pristine sedan holding court. I stood a few feet away, watching 4 different women approach her, hug her, and thank her for the casseroles she had brought them during difficult times. "Gloria, you are an absolute angel," one of the older women said, patting Gloria's shoulder. "You really are, doing God's work every single day." Gloria smiled humbly and cast her eyes downward, whispering a quiet blessing in return. I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed against the leather wallet, the keys I no longer needed, and finally the smooth glass of my cellular phone. I unlocked the screen using purely muscle memory. I found the voice memo application. I pressed the red circular button. Georgia is a one-party consent state. I dropped the phone back into the dark depths of my purse, letting it capture every single lie she spoke in that sunlit parking lot. I had finally begun. The following Monday afternoon brought a sudden, violent summer thunderstorm. The rain lashed against the large glass windows of a small coffee shop located on the edge of downtown Macon. The place smelled heavily of roasting beans, wet umbrellas, and the sharp hiss of the espresso machine. I sat in a booth near the back, nursing a cup of hot water with lemon. Lorraine walked through the door, shaking the rain from her umbrella. She slid into the booth across from me and immediately placed a thick manila envelope on the wooden table. "My investigator works fast," she said, tapping the envelope once. "We have the preliminary report." I stared at the brown paper. I asked her what it said. Lorraine did not pull the papers out. She preferred to deliver the information herself, watching my face to gauge how much I could handle. "Her name is Amber Lawson," Lorraine began. "She is 28 years old. She works as a dental assistant at a clinic on the south side of town. She lives in an apartment complex about 4 miles from your house. She is currently 4 months pregnant." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. I already knew most of this from the text messages, but hearing a lawyer say it out loud made it terrifyingly real. "She is Patty Lawson's daughter," Lorraine continued. My head snapped up. Patty Lawson was Gloria's best friend. They had sat next to each other in church for 30 years. They co-chaired the charity bake sales. "The investigator got photographs," Lorraine said, her voice dropping lower. "Trent's car has been parked in the back lot of Amber's apartment building 3 or 4 times a week. He stays for hours." I closed my eyes. The image of Trent's familiar sedan parked outside another woman's home burned against the back of my eyelids. I thought about all the evenings he claimed he had to work late at the bank to finalize loan approvals. "There is something else," Lorraine said. The tone of her voice shifted. It lost the clinical detached edge and became something much darker. "Something you need to brace yourself for." I opened my eyes and looked at her. I told her I was ready. My investigator ran a standard background check, which includes pulling public records for insurance claims and emergency room visits. 14 months ago, Amber Lawson went to the emergency room at Macon General. Lorraine paused. She watched my hands grip the edges of the table. "She was 14 weeks pregnant at the time," Lorraine said softly. "The medical records note a spontaneous abortion. A miscarriage." The doctor on call specifically noted unexplained severe uterine contractions. The sounds of the coffee shop seemed to fade away. The hissing espresso machine, the rain beating against the glass, the chatter of the other customers. It all vanished. 14 months ago, I whispered, doing the math in my head. That was before Trent and I were even married. That was before she even met Trent. Exactly, Lorraine said. It was not Trent's baby. She was dating a mechanic back then. But the investigator found out that Gloria had been visiting Amber frequently during that first pregnancy. Patty Lawson told people at church how sweet it was that Gloria was bringing Amber special natural supplements to help her through her first trimester. The air left my lungs. The entire horrifying picture finally snapped into sharp focus. Gloria had not just poisoned me to free Trent for another woman. She had done this before. She considered any pregnancy that did not fit her perfect orchestrated plan to be a mistake that needed fixing. She had ended Amber's first pregnancy because she did not approve of the father. Then 3 months later, she introduced the grieving, vulnerable young woman to her own son. Can we prove it? I asked. My voice did not shake. The tears that had been threatening to fall completely dried up, replaced by a cold, hard fury. Lorraine looked at me with a fierce intensity. We are going to, but it will not be easy. The medical records from 14 months ago only show unexplained contractions. They did not run a toxicology panel on Amber back then, because they had no reason to suspect foul play. I asked her what we needed to do. There is one way to tie all of this together quickly, Lorraine said, leaning closer across the small table. But you are not going to like it. I told her I did not care what it took. We need Gloria to say it herself, Lorraine explained. The recording from the church parking lot is a good start, but it is just small talk. We need her to acknowledge the vitamins. We need her to admit to her intent. And the only way she is going to do that is if she feels completely comfortable, completely in control, and completely convinced that you are too weak to do anything about it. Lorraine reached out and touched the back of my hand. Her fingers were warm. You are going to have to sit in a room with the woman who tried to kill your child. You are going to have to ask her questions, and you are going to have to sit there and listen to her justify it without reacting. Can you do that, Claire? I looked out the window at the driving rain. I thought about the tiny, perfect olive green capsules in the plastic bottle. I thought about the nursery I had painted mint green using the colors Gloria had suggested. I thought about the baby currently sleeping safely beneath my ribs. I turned back to the lawyer. I looked her dead in the eye. I told her to tell me exactly what to say. Wednesday afternoon arrived with a thick and suffocating heat that baked the pavement all across the city. I sat in the driver's seat of my car for 10 full minutes before opening the door. The engine was off. The air conditioning had long since faded, leaving me surrounded by the stagnant Georgia summer air. My hand rested on the heavy leather of my purse on the passenger seat. Inside that purse sat my cellular phone. The screen was dark, but the recording application was already running. The tiny digital timer was silently counting the seconds. I picked up the empty glass casserole dish from the floorboard. It was heavy, made of thick tempered glass that had belonged to Gloria for over 20 years. I carried it up the familiar concrete walkway, leading to her red brick house. The manicured lawn stretched out perfectly green and flawless on either side of me. Everything about this property projected an image of perfect, unwavering Southern respectability. 2 weeks ago, I would have walked up this path, feeling nothing but gratitude for the woman waiting inside. Today, every single step required a conscious command to my leg muscles. I pushed the front door open. It was never locked during the day. The smell of lemon-scented dish soap and warm water drifted down the hallway. I followed the sound of the running faucet into the kitchen. The afternoon sunlight poured through the floral curtains hanging over the sink. They were a pale yellow pattern with tiny white daisies. I stared at that fabric for a second. 2 months after Trent and I bought our house, Gloria had shown up with the exact same curtains for my kitchen windows. She told me she just wanted the two houses to feel like family. I had thanked her for the gesture. Standing here now, watching the light filter through the yellow fabric, I finally understood it was not a gesture of love. It was an act of territorial marking. Gloria stood at the sink with her back to me. She wore a lavender blouse and her hair was pinned up perfectly. She was scrubbing a roasting pan, her hands buried in thick white suds. I brought your dish back, I said. My voice sounded remarkably steady. I placed the heavy glass container on the island counter. Oh, just leave it right there, honey, Gloria called out over the sound of the running water. She did not turn around. I will get to it in a minute. How are you feeling today? Is that grandbaby of mine behaving? I pulled out one of the wooden bar stools and sat down. My purse rested right next to me on the counter, the microphone pointed directly across the room. Mama G, I began. I forced myself to use the affectionate nickname. It tasted like poison on my tongue. I need to ask you something about those vitamins you have been bringing me. The rhythmic scrubbing sound stopped. The water continued to run out of the faucet, splashing against the metal bottom of the sink. Gloria kept her back to me for 3 long seconds. "What about them, sweetheart?" she asked. Her tone remained perfectly light. "The doctor wants me to switch to a different brand." She said something about some levels being off. Gloria reached up and turned the silver handle. The water stopped instantly. The sudden silence in the kitchen was deafening, broken only by the steady and muffled hum of the refrigerator. "Levels," Gloria repeated. She picked up a pristine white towel and began drying her hands, pressing the fabric carefully between each finger. "What levels?" "I am not entirely sure," I said. I leaned forward slightly to make sure the phone in my purse caught every syllable. "Something in my blood work." She seemed concerned about it. Gloria finally turned around to face me. The warm, maternal smile was plastered firmly across her face, but it did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were sharp. They were rapidly calculating the information I had just handed her, searching for the exact degree of danger. "Did she say what specifically was wrong with your blood?" she asked. "No. She just said she wants to run more tests. And she asked me who provides my daily vitamins." Gloria draped the white towel slowly over the edge of the counter. She took a step toward the island. The lavender fabric of her blouse rustled softly in the quiet room. "Well, honey," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness. "Doctors always overthink these things. You know exactly how they are. They find one little anomaly, and they want to run a dozen expensive tests to justify their paychecks. I have been doing this for 20 years. I know what goes into those pills. Those vitamins are perfectly safe." I sat completely still. I looked at the woman who had hugged me at my wedding. I looked at the woman who had cried when I announced my pregnancy. She was looking right back at me, lying with such practiced ease that it terrified me. She was not worried about my health. She did not ask a single question about the baby. She only cared about defending the pills. "I suppose you are right," I murmured. I stood up from the stool and picked up my purse. "I just wanted to let you know." "Do not you worry about a thing," Gloria said, stepping forward to pat my arm. Her hand felt like a block of ice through my thin cotton sleeve. "I just want what is best for my grandbaby." I walked back out into the suffocating afternoon heat. I got into my car, locked the doors, and reached into my purse. I stopped the recording. It was not a full confession. She had not named the poison, but she had explicitly claimed responsibility for the vitamins and insisted they were safe. It was the very first brick in the wall we were building around her. 2 days later, the rain returned to Macon. It was Friday afternoon. I sat in Lorraine Greer in her spacious office, watching the water slide down the large glass window pane behind the desk. The sky outside was a bruised, heavy purple. Lorraine walked into the room carrying a thick stack of printed papers. She did not bother sitting down. She stood over her desk and dropped the stack onto the polished mahogany wood. It landed with a heavy and satisfying thud. "The emergency petition went through," Lorraine said. Her gravelly voice held a note of pure predatory satisfaction. "The judge signed the subpoena for the credit card records yesterday morning. The bank complied an hour ago." I pulled my chair closer to the desk. I looked at the top page. It was a standard bank statement filled with rows of black text and numerical values. "What did you find?" I asked. Lorraine picked up her gold pen and used the tip to point at a specific line of text halfway down the page. 6 orders, she stated, tapping the paper once for emphasis. 6 separate transactions processed through an online herbal supplement distributor. Each order consists of exactly 2 bottles of blue cohosh capsules. She slid the first page aside, revealing the shipping manifests provided by the vendor. "Shipped directly to 114 Magnolia Lane," Lorraine said, looking up at me. "That is Gloria and her home address." I stared at the black ink on the white paper. The physical proof was sitting right in front of me. It was no longer just a doctor and her suspicion or a vague text message. It was a documented financial transaction. "She bought it online," I whispered. I felt a strange hollow sensation open up beneath my ribs. She used her own credit card. She had it shipped to her own front door. She did not even try to hide it. Lorraine set her pen down. She leaned forward, resting her hands flat on the documents. "That is the thing about people like her, Claire. She did not think she needed to hide it, because she did not think you would ever dare to check. She viewed you as compliant. She viewed you as naive. She operated under the absolute certainty that her position in the family made her completely untouchable." I reached out and traced my finger over the date of the very first transaction. I counted backward in my head. "The first order was placed 5 months ago," I said. My voice cracked on the final word. "Right at the end of your first trimester," Lorraine confirmed quietly. right around the time the risk of a natural miscarriage drops significantly. Right when she realized you were actually going to keep this baby and that Trent was going to be permanently tied to you. The room grew perfectly quiet. The sound of the rain lashing against the window suddenly seemed incredibly loud. The timeline was undeniable. She had waited to see if nature would do the work for her. When it did not, she opened her laptop and purchased a weapon. The most recent transaction was dated just 2 weeks ago. She had never stopped. She was escalating. So what happens now? I asked, pulling my hand away from the papers. Phase 2, Lorraine replied. She walked around the desk and sat down in her heavy leather chair. This paper trail proves she bought the substance. The toxicology report proves it ended up in your bloodstream. But a defense attorney from Atlanta will try to argue that she bought it for herself for menopause symptoms, and that you accidentally took it, or that you are making it up to ruin her son in the divorce. We need one more recording. We need her to acknowledge her intent. I nodded slowly. I knew what I had to do. Once we have that, Lorraine continued, and once we have Amber Lawson and her sworn statement about what happened 14 months ago, we drop the hammer. We file the criminal complaint with the Bibb County Sheriff. We file the fault divorce simultaneously. And we request an emergency protective order. We hit them with everything on the exact same day. I left the law office late that afternoon. The rain had stopped leaving the city streets slick and shining under the streetlights. I did not go back to Lorraine and her couch. Trent was working the closing shift at the bank, which meant the house in the suburbs would be completely empty until 9 o'clock. I needed my clothes. I needed my maternity pillows. I needed the documents locked in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house was completely dark. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was stale. A subtle scent of old beer and unwashed laundry drifted from the living room. Trent had clearly not bothered to clean anything since I walked out. I moved quickly. I did not turn on the main overhead lights. I used the small hallway lamps casting long shadows against the walls. I packed a large suitcase with my remaining maternity dresses, my comfortable shoes, and my toiletries. I emptied the filing cabinet, shoving the birth certificates, the social security cards, and the joint tax returns into a heavy canvas tote bag. Then I stopped in the hallway. The door to the nursery was standing wide open. I had avoided looking at it since I walked inside. Now I turned my body and stepped over the threshold. The room was bathed in the pale blue light of the evening sky shining through the uncurtained window. The walls were painted a soft, soothing mint green. Gloria had picked out the color chips. She had stood in this exact spot holding the paper squares up to the light, telling me that mint was the perfect calming shade for a newborn. The white wooden crib sat against the far wall. Gloria had ordered it. The mobile hanging above it, covered in small plush stars, was a gift from her church group. The expensive overstuffed rocking chair sitting in the corner had been delivered just 3 weeks ago, paid for by Gloria and her credit card. I stood in the center of the room. I placed both of my hands over my stomach. The baby was sleeping quietly. I looked around at the perfectly curated space. For 6 months I had walked into this room and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I had grown up without a mother. I had stood alone at my own parents' and their funeral when I was 22 years old, staring at empty church pews, wishing for a family to hold me. When Gloria started buying these things, when she started painting these walls, I thought I had finally found the mother I lost. I thought this room was built on a foundation of pure, unconditional love. I reached out and touched the wooden rail of the crib. The wood was cold. This room was not built on love. It was built on access. Every single piece of furniture she bought was a perfectly crafted reason to enter my house. Every visit to help arrange the clothes was an opportunity to stand in my kitchen. Every gesture of motherly support was a calculated maneuver to maintain total control over the environment where I kept my food, my water, and my daily vitamins. She had decorated a cage and I had thanked her for the paint job. I walked over to the small wooden dresser. Sitting on top of it, framed in cheap wood, was a small, faded Polaroid photograph. It was the only picture I had of my own mother, Jean. In the photo, Jean was heavily pregnant, wearing a bright blue shirt, sitting alone on the front porch of our old house. She looked tired, but she looked fierce. She had raised me entirely on her own. She had protected me with everything she had. I picked up the wooden frame. I wiped a speck of dust from the glass. I slipped the photograph carefully into the side pocket of my tote bag. I turned around and walked out of the nursery. I did not pack a single baby outfit from the closet. I did not take the plush blankets or the tiny socks. I left every single thing that had Gloria and her invisible fingerprints on it right where it was. My daughter would not sleep in a bed bought with blood money. My daughter would not wear clothes provided by a woman who tried to stop her heart from beating. I carried my bags to the front door. I stepped out onto the porch. The humid night air wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I pulled the front door shut behind me, listening to the deadbolt click into place. I walked down the driveway to my car, loaded my bags into the trunk, and climbed into the driver's seat. I started the engine and drove away from the neighborhood without looking in the rearview mirror once. I reached the main intersection just outside the subdivision. The traffic light burned a bright, solid red. I pressed my foot against the brake pedal, bringing the car to a complete stop. The street was entirely empty. The only sound was the low hum of my engine and the rhythmic ticking of the turn signal. Suddenly, the screen of my cellular phone lit up on the passenger seat. It vibrated against the leather upholstery, a harsh and sudden buzz in the quiet car. I reached over and picked it up. It was a text message from a phone number I did not recognize. I stared at the glowing letters on the screen. "Hi, this is Amber. I know who you are. Can we talk?" The text message glowed on the screen of my cellular phone in the dark car. It was from a number I did not recognize. The words were simple. "Hi, this is Amber. I know who you are. Can we talk?" I stared at the glowing letters while the engine of my car idled at the empty intersection. I did not reply immediately. I drove to my temporary room, sat on the edge of the mattress, and forwarded a screenshot of the message to Lorraine. My attorney called me less than 2 minutes later. She told me to agree to the meeting. She instructed me to pick a neutral public location. She reminded me to keep my phone in my purse with the recording application running. "Hear what she has to say," Lorraine had advised, "but do not promise her anything." Sunday morning arrived with a blinding, oppressive glare. I pulled into the parking lot of a Waffle House right off Interstate 75. It was located miles away from our quiet suburban neighborhood, far enough that neither of us had to worry about running into anyone from the church congregation. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside. The air conditioning was working overtime, blasting cold air that immediately prickled against my arms. The diner smelled heavily of frying bacon, melted butter, and old grease that had settled into the upholstery over decades. The sharp hiss of the coffee brewing machine cut through the low murmur of the morning crowd. The early sunlight glared through the large front windows, illuminating millions of dust motes dancing in the air above the sticky laminate tables. I spotted her immediately. She was sitting in the very back booth. Amber Lawson looked entirely different from the image I had constructed in my head over the past few days. She was 28 years old, but sitting there with her shoulders hunched forward, she looked like a frightened teenager. Both of her hands were wrapped tightly around a tall glass of ice water. The condensation dripped down the sides, pooling on the table. Her eyes were red and severely swollen. I walked over and slid into the vinyl booth across from her. My purse sat right between us on the table. The microphone was positioned perfectly. Amber looked up. Her hands trembled against the wet glass. "I know you hate me," she said. Her voice was thin and ragged. "I would hate me too." I did not flag down a waitress. I did not pick up a menu. I just looked at the young woman sitting across from me. I looked at the slight swell of her stomach hidden beneath a loose cotton shirt. "I do not hate you," I replied. My tone was flat, completely devoid of the anger she was clearly expecting. "I do not know you well enough to hate you." A single tear spilled over her lower lash line. She wiped it away furiously with the back of her hand. "He told me you two were separated," Amber whispered, leaning forward across the table. "He told me you were sleeping in different rooms. He said you were only staying legally married for the health insurance benefits because of the pregnancy." I believed him for almost an entire year before I finally found out the truth. Found out what I asked. Amber swallowed hard. "I found out that you did not know anything about me. I found out that you were actively decorating a nursery in that house. And I found out that Gloria was the one who introduced us on purpose." I kept my hands resting quietly on the edge of the table. I let her speak. Amber explained the entire timeline. She told me about a barbecue her mother had hosted last summer. Patty Lawson and Gloria had been best friends for 3 decades. Gloria had attended the party and deliberately brought Trent along. She spent the entire afternoon pushing them together, making sure they sat next to each other, orchestrating every single interaction. "When I found out I was pregnant 4 months ago," Amber continued, her voice dropping to an embarrassed whisper, "I panicked. I told my mother. My mother told Gloria. And Gloria came over to my apartment. She hugged me. She told me this was God working his plan. She said Trent needed a fresh start with a woman who actually understood the importance of family." I felt a cold sensation spread through my chest. Gloria had not just enabled the infidelity. She had built it from the ground up. She had handpicked a replacement for me, manipulated a younger woman into believing a complete fabrication, and used religion to justify destroying my marriage. Amber was completely convinced that she was stepping into a broken situation that was already over. She had no idea she was the weapon Gloria was using to dismantle my life. Amber kept talking, apologizing over and over again. I listened. I did not tell her about the toxicology report. I did not mention the blue cohosh. Lorraine had warned me that it was not the right time to reveal our hand. The recording application on my phone captured every single tearful admission about Trent and his lies and every detail about Gloria and her calculated matchmaking. I slid out of the booth 20 minutes later. I left Amber sitting there with her melting ice water. I walked out into the blazing parking lot, got into my car, and dialed my husband. He answered on the second ring. His voice was thick with sleep. "We need to talk," I said. "At the house. Just the two of us. Be there in an hour." I hung up before he could respond. My voice had been so perfectly calm, so completely devoid of any emotion, that he probably thought I was calling to negotiate a schedule for picking up the rest of my belongings. When I pulled into the driveway of the house we had purchased together, the property looked entirely different to me. It looked dead. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house was stifling. Trent had not bothered to open any of the windows or turn on the ceiling fans. The stale air smelled faintly of old beer and unwashed clothes. The heavy curtains in the living room were drawn tight, blocking out the afternoon light. I found Trent sitting at the dining room table. It was the exact same wooden table where we had eaten dinner every single night for 2 years. The chair that Gloria usually claimed during her frequent uninvited visits sat completely empty at the end of the table. Trent was wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and khaki pants. He looked up when I walked into the room. He did not stand. I stopped a few feet away from the table. I did not sit down. For the very first time in our entire relationship, I stood tall while he remained seated. The power dynamic in the room shifted immediately. A single beam of harsh afternoon sun managed to cut through a gap in the curtain slicing straight across the wooden table. It left Trent sitting in the dark shadows while I stood entirely in the light. I took my cellular phone out of my purse. I placed it face down on the dining table right in front of him. The recording application was already running. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I just looked down at the man I had married and delivered the facts with the precision of a surgeon holding a scalpel. "I know about Amber," I said. The silence that followed those words was absolute. Trent stopped breathing. The muscles in his jaw tightened. 4 agonizing seconds ticked by. He finally opened his mouth. "Claire, I know she is 4 months pregnant," I continued, my voice steady and completely relentless. "I know you have been sleeping with her for almost a year. I know your mother introduced the two of you at a barbecue before I even knew I was pregnant." Trent pushed his chair back slightly. The wood scraped loudly against the floorboards. "It was not like that. It is not what you think. And I know about the vitamins," I said. Trent froze. His right hand instinctively flew up to rub the back of his neck. It was the tell. The exact same nervous gesture he had used since he was a little boy whenever he was backed into a corner with a lie. "What about the vitamins?" he asked. His voice was suddenly very thin. I placed both of my hands on the edge of the dining table and leaned forward. "Blue cohosh," I stated clearly. "Your mother has been putting blue cohosh in my prenatal vitamins for 5 months. My doctor found it in my blood. She has the toxicology report. She has the physical blood samples. She has a documented chain of custody. Your mother tried to kill the baby." I watched the realization hit him. It did not look like anger. It did not look like defensive outrage. It looked like a building collapsing inward. The false victory happened right then. Trent shattered. His face crumpled, losing all of its structure. He let out a ragged choking sound that seemed to tear its way up from his chest. He slipped entirely off his chair, his knees hitting the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. He crawled forward and wrapped his arms around my legs, burying his face against my knees. He was weeping. He was crying so hard his entire body shook. "I did not know." Trent sobbed into the fabric of my dress. "I did not know she would go that far. I swear to God, Claire. I swear to God. I knew she did not want the baby, but I never thought she would do something like that. Jesus Christ. I am so sorry." I stood perfectly still. I looked down at my husband weeping on the floor. His tears were soaking into the knees of his khaki pants. For one fraction of a second, the orphan inside of me felt a sharp pang of pity. 2 years ago, I had married this man because he made me feel safe. Now he was kneeling on the floor begging for his life, swearing on a God he rarely prayed to. But then I remembered the text messages. I remembered the glowing screen of his phone in the dark bedroom. I remembered his mother saying she would take care of things. I remembered Trent reading those words and choosing to put his phone away. He did not ask what kind of poison she was buying. He did not ask how she planned to eliminate the problem. He just closed his eyes and let his mother clear the path for him. He was not innocent. He was a coward who enjoyed the benefits of a murder without having to get his own hands dirty. Trent looked up at me. His face was red and covered in snot. He started making desperate promises. He told me he would sign whatever post-nuptial agreement I wanted. He promised to divorce himself from Amber completely. He swore he would cut his mother out of his life forever. He promised we could go to therapy. He promised anything and everything to make the nightmare stop. I reached down and picked up my phone from the table. "I will think about it," I said. I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I left him kneeling in the shadows on the hardwood floor. I got into my car and locked the doors. The interior was sweltering, but I did not turn on the engine. I immediately dialed Lorraine. She answered on the very first ring. "He confessed," I told her, staring at the closed front door of my house. "I have it all on the recording. He specifically said he knew she did not want the baby. He said he did not think she would go that far." Lorraine was silent for 3 seconds. When she finally spoke, her gravelly voice was tight with victory. "That is not a denial of involvement, Claire. That is an explicit admission of prior knowledge. Under Georgia law, knowing about a felony in progress and failing to act constitutes criminal conspiracy. You did it. We have him." I hung up the phone. I leaned my head against the steering wheel. I had won the battle. My husband had surrendered completely. But as I pulled out of the driveway and drove away from the neighborhood, a deep sense of dread began to pool in my stomach. Trent was the weak link. He was just a pawn on the board. The queen had not yet made her move. I would not discover until months later, when Lorraine subpoenaed the phone company records for the upcoming trial, exactly what happened the moment my car disappeared down the street. The digital logs painted a perfect, horrifying picture of that Sunday evening. Trent did not stay on the floor crying. He picked himself up, wiped his face, and immediately called his mother. The phone records showed a conversation lasting less than 4 minutes. I could easily imagine the panic in his voice as he told her that I knew everything. I could imagine him stammering out the details about the doctor, the blood tests, and the blue cohosh. Gloria did not panic. According to the text messages we later recovered from his device, her response was utterly devoid of maternal warmth. She operated with the cold calculation of a cornered animal. "Did you say anything stupid to her?" Gloria had asked him. Trent admitted what he had done. He admitted that he had fallen to his knees. He admitted that he had told me he did not think she would go that far. "Lord have mercy," Trent, Gloria had replied. She hung up on her weeping son. She did not call a lawyer. She did not try to call me to apologize or explain. Gloria understood the battlefield better than anyone else in that town. She knew that the law moved slowly, but social destruction could happen overnight. Exactly 3 minutes after hanging up with Trent, Gloria opened her contact list and dialed the private cellular number of Elder Dawson, the senior pastor of First Baptist Macon. Pastor Gloria had said, putting on her most devastatingly concerned voice. "I need to talk to you about Claire. I am so incredibly worried about her. She has been completely unstable lately. The pregnancy hormones are doing terrible things to her mind. She ran away from home, and now she is making these wild, paranoid accusations about her own family. We just do not know what to do. She had been preparing for a war while I was still trying to survive a broken heart. The false victory was over. The real fight was just about to begin." The air inside First Baptist Macon was usually thick with the comforting scent of melting candle wax and old paper hymnals. Today, it just felt suffocating. Sunday morning had arrived. Lorraine had explicitly instructed me to attend the service. She told me to smile, to sit in my usual pew, and to act as if my entire world had not just shattered into a million jagged pieces. I had to maintain the illusion of the devoted, unsuspecting wife. I parked my car in the massive asphalt lot and walked up the wide concrete steps. My maternity dress clung to my skin in the heavy Georgia humidity, but the real chill hit me the moment I stepped through the heavy wooden doors. The atmosphere in the vestibule was entirely different. Mr. Henderson, the elderly usher who had handed me a weekly bulletin every Sunday for 2 years, suddenly found something incredibly interesting to look at on the ceiling. He did not offer me a program. He did not say good morning. As I walked down the carpeted aisle, conversations stopped. Women I had shared recipes with turned their shoulders slightly inward, creating a physical barrier. I stopped near the 4th row. A woman named Brenda Stokes stood there wearing a pale yellow dress. She had attended my baby shower. She had bought us a set of expensive receiving blankets. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Brenda looked at my stomach, then up to my face. Her eyes were filled with a sickening mixture of pity and caution. "Hello, Claire," Brenda murmured. She reached out and patted my arm with a rigid hand. "Gloria told us you have been having a really difficult time lately. We are keeping you in our prayers, sweetheart. Pregnancy hormones can do some genuinely crazy things to a woman and her mind. You just need to rest and let your family take care of you." I kept the smile glued to my face. I asked her exactly what Gloria had said. Brenda glanced nervously toward the front of the sanctuary. I followed her gaze. Gloria was standing near the altar. She wore a pristine peach-colored dress. She was speaking quietly to the senior pastor, shaking her head with a look of profound, martyred sadness. "She is just worried sick about you, sweetheart," Brenda whispered, stepping back. "We all are. Running away from your husband in your condition is just not rational." I sat down in the empty wooden pew. I felt the baby kick against my ribs, a tiny flutter of life inside a room that had suddenly turned hostile. I looked at Gloria across the sea of congregants. She had spent the last week actively poisoning the well. She did not use lawyers. She used 15 years of casseroles, charity drives, and prayer circles. She had preemptively painted me as a paranoid, unstable, hysterical pregnant woman who had abandoned her marital home. She was building a narrative where any accusation I made against her would simply sound like the rambling delusions of a sick mind. She had a 15-year foundation of social credibility. I had 2 years. The community had already chosen their side. I survived the hour-long service. I walked out to my car, retrieved my phone, and texted Lorraine. I told her the community was completely turned against me. Lorraine texted back immediately. She told me we needed the final piece of evidence. We needed the clear, undeniable confession. Wednesday afternoon arrived with a brutal baking heat. I drove to Magnolia Lane. I parked in the driveway behind Gloria and her pristine sedan. I reached into my purse, opened the recording application on my cellular phone, and pressed the red button. I left the phone resting near the top of my open leather bag. I walked up to the red brick house and let myself in. The smell of gardenia air freshener hit me like a physical wall. It was incredibly strong today. She had sprayed it heavily, coating every surface in the hallway with the thick floral scent, perhaps trying to mask the sterile smell of her own calculated life. I walked into the kitchen. The room was perfectly spotless. The laptop I had seen days earlier was completely gone. There were no vitamin bottles on the counter. Every trace of her online purchases had been scrubbed clean. Gloria stood by the kitchen island. She wore a lavender blouse and beige trousers. She looked up and offered me a warm, flawless smile. "Claire, sweetheart," she said, pouring a glass of sweet tea from a crystal pitcher. "Sit down. Have some tea. You look exhausted." I pulled out a wooden stool and sat down. I placed my purse carefully on the counter between us. I did not touch the glass of tea. "Mama G," I said, keeping my hands folded in my lap. "I need to ask you something, and I really need you to be honest with me." "Of course, honey," she replied smoothly. "Always." "The vitamins you gave me," I said, watching her eyes. "What exactly was in them?" Gloria set the crystal pitcher down on the granite counter. Her movements were slow, precise, and entirely controlled. "What a strange question," she said, letting out a soft, dismissive chuckle. "They were prenatal vitamins, Claire. Good ones. Considerably better than anything that local drugstore sells. My doctor found something called blue cohosh in my blood," I stated clearly. "She said it causes severe uterine contractions. She said someone has been actively putting it in my daily supplements." The silence in the kitchen stretched out. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the antique cuckoo clock on the wall. Gloria had bought that clock the year her husband died, claiming she needed the house to have a heartbeat. Now the ticking sounded like a countdown. Gloria looked at me for 3 full seconds. Then the warm maternal mask simply melted away. Her posture straightened. The condescending smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hardened expression. She turned around, opened the refrigerator, and placed the pitcher inside. She closed the door and turned back to face me. "And you think I did that?" she asked. Her tone was no longer sweet. It was sharp and defensive. "Claire, sweetheart, I am your mother-in-law. I have been taking care of you for 2 solid years. I have fed you. I have driven you to your medical appointments. I decorated that beautiful nursery in your house with my own 2 hands. Then what is blue cohosh doing in my bloodstream?" I demanded. Gloria placed both hands flat on the kitchen island and leaned toward me. "I did what any mother would do," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I protected my son and his future." The words hit the microphone in my purse perfectly. I did not speak. I let her fill the silence. She had held this justification inside her chest for months, and now that she believed I was entirely isolated and powerless, she wanted me to know exactly why she had won. Amber is good people, Gloria continued, her eyes locking onto mine. She comes from good people. She would have been absolutely perfect for Trent from the very beginning. But he met you first, and you got in the way. You made him comfortable. I was not going to stand by and let you trap my son with a baby he never even planned for. She paused, taking a deep breath. And then she exposed the massive gaping blind spot in her own arrogant logic. It is not like I gave you poisonous pills, Claire, she said, waving her hand dismissively. It is just herbs. It is entirely natural. Women have been using blue cohosh for hundreds of years to handle these things. I just helped nature along a little bit. No one was going to get seriously hurt. The body knows exactly what to do. I stared at her in absolute horror. She honestly believed what she was saying. She was a former pharmacy technician. She had spent 2 decades counting pills and reading basic labels, but she had absolutely no medical training. She lived in a delusional reality where she genuinely believed that herbal meant harmless. She thought that inducing early labor between the 5th and 8th month of pregnancy was just a natural correction. She did not comprehend that forcing a delivery at that stage outside of a hospital resulted in a stillbirth. She thought she was just clearing the board. "Who are you going to tell Claire?" Gloria asked, a cruel smirk finally touching the corners of her mouth. "The church congregation. They already know you are suffering from paranoid delusions. The police department. With what evidence? Some natural herbs in your blood. You cannot even prove I bought them. You cannot prove anything." I stood up from the stool. I picked up my purse. "Thank you, Mama G," I said quietly. I walked toward the front door. "Claire," Gloria called out behind me. Her voice took on that fake, syrupy tone again. "Do not be dramatic. Come back here. Sit down and drink your tea." I did not turn around. I walked out the front door, marched down the driveway, and got into my car. I locked the doors with trembling fingers. I reached into my purse, stopped the recording, and immediately attached the audio file to a secure message. I sent it directly to Lorraine. The adrenaline drained out of my body all at once, leaving me shivering in the sweltering heat of the car. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and listened to the sound of my own ragged breathing. She believed she was untouchable. She believed she had already won. 2 days later, the reality of Gloria and her ruthless strategy crashed down on me. It was Friday afternoon. I walked into the downtown law office. The sky outside was dumping a torrential summer rainstorm onto the city streets. Lorraine Greer was sitting behind her desk. She was not tapping her gold pen. Both of her hands were pressed flat against a massive stack of legal documents. A ceramic mug of coffee sat untouched near her elbow. A cold, stagnant film had formed on the surface of the dark liquid. Lorraine never let her coffee go cold unless something was terribly wrong. "Sit down," Lorraine said. Her voice was pure gravel. I sat in the leather guest chair. I asked her what happened. She hired Calloway and Marsh, Lorraine explained, pushing the thick stack of papers toward the center of the desk. "They are a massive defense firm up in Atlanta. They do not play games and they move incredibly fast. They just filed 3 preemptive motions with the county court this morning." A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I asked her to explain the motions. "First," Lorraine said, holding up a finger, "they filed an emergency petition for a temporary custody and fitness evaluation. Her attorneys are officially claiming that you abruptly abandoned the marital home without cause. They submitted affidavits from 4 different members of your church congregation, stating that you have been exhibiting severe paranoid ideation regarding your mother-in-law. They are arguing that you pose a direct risk to your unborn child due to extreme mental instability, and they are demanding a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation before you give birth." I felt the air leave the room. She was using the church against me on official legal documents. Second, Lorraine continued, raising another finger. "They sent a formal cease and desist letter directly to Dr. Okonkwo. They are threatening her with a massive medical malpractice lawsuit, claiming she is making unsubstantiated and defamatory accusations about a patient and her family members based on dubious interpretations of alternative herbal clean medicine." "Can they do that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Can they sue the doctor?" "They can threaten it," Lorraine said grimly. "And finally, they filed a motion to suppress any and all audio recordings you might possess. They are claiming that the recordings were obtained under false pretenses from a woman in emotional distress." "But Georgia is a one-party consent state," I argued, remembering what she had taught me. "You told me the recording was legal." "It is legal," Lorraine agreed. "The motion to suppress will ultimately fail in front of a judge. But that is not their goal, Claire. Their goal is delay. Calloway and Marsh know how to bury the court system in paperwork. They want to delay the criminal investigation. They want to force you into a psychiatric hold. You are due to deliver this baby in exactly 4 weeks. If they manage to get a judge to order a psychological evaluation before we file the criminal battery charges, it entirely changes the narrative. Suddenly, you are not a victim of a crime. You are just an unstable, hysterical pregnant woman making wild accusations against a pillar of the community. I sat frozen in the chair. The rain battered violently against the glass window pane. I felt completely defeated. I had the blood tests. I had the bank statements. I had the audio recording of her confessing to the entire plot. But Gloria had a pristine 15-year reputation, a massive Atlanta legal team, and a church congregation willing to swear I was insane. I was 38 years old, sleeping on a couch in a law office, and I was about to lose my daughter to the very woman who had tried to kill her. "There is one thing they did not account for," Lorraine said softly. I looked up. Lorraine picked up her gold pen. Amber Lawson Lorraine stated, "If Amber was subjected to the exact same treatment 14 months ago, and if we can definitively prove that pattern of behavior, then this is no longer a case of a paranoid pregnant woman fighting a sweet church lady. This becomes a case of a serial offender. And there is not a single high-priced lawyer in Atlanta who can successfully spin a story when 2 completely different women walk into a police precinct and describe the exact same poisoning method used by the exact same perpetrator." Lorraine pushed her desk phone across the polished wood. "Call her," Lorraine commanded. "Right now." I picked up the heavy receiver. I dialed the number from the text message I had received earlier that week. The phone rang twice. "Hello," a quiet voice answered. "Amber," I said. "It is Claire." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I need to ask you something about your first pregnancy," I said, gripping the plastic receiver tightly. 14 months ago, when you lost the baby, you told me Gloria came over and gave you supplements to help you through the first trimester." "Yes," Amber whispered. Her voice sounded fragile like a piece of spun glass. "What did she tell you they were?" I asked. Amber took a shaky breath. The silence stretched out for 3 seconds. "She told me it was folic acid," Amber finally said. "She brought me a bottle. She told me it was the best thing for the baby. I took it every single morning until the cramps started." I closed my eyes. The pattern was identical. Gloria had handed her poison wrapped in the promise of maternal care. "I know I told the young woman on the phone. That is exactly why I am calling you." I hung up the receiver. I stood up and walked over to the large window. The storm was washing the city streets clean. I placed both of my hands firmly over my stomach. The baby kicked with a strong, steady rhythm. She was alive. She was fighting. I looked out at the gray sky and made a silent, unbreakable promise to the daughter growing inside me. I was going to burn Gloria to the ground, and I was not going to let anyone stop me. The rain from Friday afternoon finally cleared, but it left behind a thick, suffocating humidity that clung to the city through the entire weekend. I spent those days confined to the small guest bedroom in Lorraine Greer's heavy brick house. By the time Tuesday night arrived, the silence in the house had become completely unbearable. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I sat on the edge of the leather sofa in the living room, surrounded by deep, heavy shadows. The only light came from the pale street lamp shining through the front window. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind raced through the terrifying reality of the legal motions Gloria had filed. I placed my hands over my stomach. The baby was kicking much less frequently now. Dr. Okonkwo had assured me this was perfectly normal for the final month. She explained that the baby was simply running out of room and rotating downward, preparing for birth. But in the dark silence of the living room, every moment of stillness from my daughter sent a sharp spike of pure terror straight into my chest. I reached into my canvas tote bag resting on the floor and pulled out my leather wallet. My fingers bypassed the useless credit cards and carefully extracted the small faded Polaroid photograph of my mother. I held it up to the pale light filtering through the window. Jean was sitting on that old wooden porch, heavily pregnant, wearing her bright blue maternity shirt. I stared at her face for a very long time. I spoke to her in my head because speaking out loud in the quiet house felt too much like breaking. "Mama," I thought, staring at the faded colors. "I married into a family because I did not have one of my own. I was so desperate for a mother to love me that I completely ignored every single warning sign. And that family tried to kill your grandchild." A tear spilled over my lower lash line. It was hot against my cold skin. Then another fell, and another. I finally cried. I did not cry for Trent and his pathetic betrayal. I did not cry for Gloria and her monstrous cruelty. I cried for myself. I cried for the lonely 22-year-old girl who had stood in a nearly empty funeral parlor desperately searching for a hand to hold. I cried because I finally realized the devastating truth about my own desperate need for affection. I had willingly handed the woman my daily vitamins and thanked her for the privilege. But as the tears soaked into the collar of my shirt, a profound shift happened deep inside my chest. The desperate, aching need to be loved by the Hensley family completely evaporated. It was replaced by something cold, solid, and entirely unbreakable. I did not need to be adopted by a mother. I was about to become one. My daughter did not need a massive, wealthy family network built on lies and manipulation. She just needed me to stand up and fight for her. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The tears stopped. I laid down on the leather cushions and stared at the ceiling. The old house settled around me, the wooden floorboards creaking softly as the temperature dropped. At exactly 4 o'clock in the morning, the cellular phone resting on the coffee table began to vibrate. The sudden, harsh buzzing noise shattered the quiet peace of the living room. I sat up and reached for the device. My hands were finally warm from the blankets. The caller identification displayed the name Amber. I pressed the green button and lifted the phone to my ear. The sky outside the window was just beginning to turn a pale, dusty pink. A single mockingbird started singing out in the magnolia tree, a sweet and innocent sound that felt entirely out of place. "Hello," I said quietly. "I am sorry to call you so early," Amber whispered. Her voice trembled. It sounded small and fragile, like she was terrified someone might hear her speaking. "It is okay," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly steady. "Tell me what happened 14 months ago." Amber took a long, shaky breath that hissed through the small speaker of the phone. "I was dating a mechanic back then," she began. "It was a messy relationship. When I found out I was pregnant, my mother told Gloria. She told Gloria everything, and Gloria came to my apartment the very next day. I closed my eyes, picturing the pastel clothing and the perfectly styled platinum hair. She sat on my couch," Amber continued, the words spilling out of her in a rush. "She told me this was not the right time for me to have a child. She said I deserved a much better life and that a baby with that boy would ruin my future. She brought a brown glass bottle with her. She told me it was a special high-grade folic acid supplement to help keep my body strong during the stress of the first trimester." The smell of fresh, strong coffee drifted into the living room. Lorraine had woken up. She walked into the room wearing a heavy cotton robe holding 2 steaming ceramic mugs. She saw the phone pressed against my ear and immediately stopped walking. She set the mugs down on the table, pointed a demanding finger at the device, and mouthed the word speaker. I pulled the phone away and tapped the speaker button. "Did you take the pills, Amber?" I asked. "I took one every single morning," Amber sobbed. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "I took them for 6 weeks. When I hit 14 weeks, the cramps started. They were so bad I could not stand up. My mother drove me to the emergency room. I lost the baby in the hospital. The doctor wrote down that it was a spontaneous abortion caused by unexplained uterine contractions." Lorraine sat down on the coffee table directly across from me. Her eyes were wide, her jaw set in a hard, rigid line. "And what did Gloria do after you lost the baby?" I asked gently. "She held me while I cried in the hospital bed," Amber wept. "She brought dozens of flowers to the room. She stroked my hair and told me that God always has a perfect plan. 3 months later, when I finally felt like I could breathe again, she invited me to my mother's backyard barbecue. That is exactly when she introduced me to Trent." I looked at Lorraine. We both understood the absolute horrifying scope of the manipulation. "She killed your baby so she could give you her son," I said. Amber let out a sharp, devastated wail. It was the sound of a woman finally seeing the bars of the cage she had been living inside. Lorraine leaned forward until her mouth was just inches away from the microphone. "Amber, this is Lorraine Greer," the attorney said. Her gravelly voice was authoritative and completely uncompromising. "I am representing Claire. I need to ask you a very direct question. Are you willing to walk into the Bibb County Sheriff's Office today and give a fully sworn recorded statement about exactly what you just told us?" The line went completely silent. 6 agonizing seconds ticked by. Only the static hum of the cellular connection and the singing mockingbird outside filled the space. "Will they arrest her?" Amber finally asked. With 2 distinct victims, Lorraine answered a perfectly matching timeline of events, an identical method of delivery, and a full toxicology report proving the presence of an abortifacient in Claire's bloodstream. "Yes, they will arrest her. This is aggravated battery against a pregnant person. With your testimony establishing a clear pattern of evidence, it elevates the situation to multiple felony counts. The defense attorneys from Atlanta will not be able to protect her from this. She killed my baby, Amber whispered, the sorrow in her voice hardening into something much sharper. Then let us make sure she finally answers for it, Lorraine said. I ended the call. The room was bright now. The Georgia sun had completely breached the horizon, filling the living room with brilliant morning light. I picked up the faded Polaroid of my mother from the sofa cushions. I did not feel any sense of loss. I only felt an incredible surging strength. Jean had carried a child entirely on her own. She had raised me without a massive support system. I finally understood that I was more than capable of doing the exact same thing. By 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning, the three of us walked through the heavy glass doors of the Bibb County Sheriff's headquarters. The precinct smelled like industrial floor wax, stale coffee, and the faint metallic scent of nervous sweat. We were ushered into a small, windowless interview room. The walls were painted a dull institutional gray. A scratched metal table bolted directly to the floor dominated the center of the room. I sat down on a hard plastic chair. A sharp ache bloomed in my lower back almost immediately. Carrying an 8.5-month pregnancy on a rigid plastic seat was pure agony, but I did not shift my weight. I sat perfectly still. Amber sat in the chair right next to me. She had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her shoulders hunched forward defensively. We were two completely different women who never should have crossed paths. Now we sat at the exact same metal table, preparing to tell the exact same story about the exact same woman. A tired-looking detective with silver hair and a rumpled suit walked into the room. He introduced himself, sat down across from us, and opened a thick notepad. Lorraine did not waste a single second. She opened her heavy leather briefcase and began laying out the evidence package across the metal table piece by piece. First, she presented the medical toxicology report. She highlighted the results from my July blood draw and the August sample clearly demonstrating the escalating levels of blue cohosh in my system. It proved continuous, methodical ingestion over a long period of time, entirely eliminating the possibility of a single accidental dose. Second, she placed the subpoenaed bank records and the shipping manifests on the table. 6 separate orders of blue cohosh capsules paid for by Gloria shipped directly to her residential address. Third, Lorraine handed over a digital storage drive containing the audio recording. She provided a printed transcript of Gloria, explicitly stating she did what any mother would do to protect her son and his future. Fourth, she laid down Amber's official emergency room records from 14 months ago, highlighting the physician's notes regarding the unexplained severe uterine contractions during her 14th week of pregnancy. Finally, Lorraine presented the printed screenshots of the text messages between Gloria and Trent. She pointed directly at the message where Gloria stated, "I could not have the baby," and the subsequent promise to take care of things. Placed in the context of Amber's past miscarriage, those messages were no longer just a vague threat. They were the established operating procedure of a serial abuser. The detective listened in absolute silence. He did not interrupt once. He took meticulous notes, his pen scratching loudly against the paper in the quiet room. He looked at the mountain of documents on the table. He looked at Lorraine. Then he looked at me, and finally at Amber. He closed his notepad with a heavy snap. "I am going to take this directly to the district attorney," the detective said, his voice grave. "Given the severe nature of these allegations, battery on a pregnant person, potential criminal conspiracy, and the established pattern evidence from 2 separate victims, I fully expect a judge to sign an arrest warrant within 48 hours. We walked out of the precinct an hour later. The midday sun was beating down on the asphalt parking lot, creating shimmering waves of heat radiating off the parked police cruisers. Lorraine walked ahead to unlock her vehicle. Amber and I walked side by side in silence. When we reached the cars, Amber stopped walking. "Claire," she said quietly. I turned to look at her. "Yes." "I am so sorry," Amber said, staring down at the ground. She was wearing a pair of white sneakers. The toes were covered in dark scuff marks and dirt. For absolutely everything. I looked at the 28-year-old girl standing in front of me. Her stomach was just beginning to show the slight, undeniable curve of a new pregnancy. I remembered exactly what it felt like to be her age. I remembered what it felt like to blindly trust the adults in the room to do the right thing. "You did not do this to me, Amber," I told her, making sure my voice carried over the sound of the nearby traffic. "She did." Amber looked up at me. She nodded once, a sharp and decisive movement. She turned around and climbed into the passenger seat of her car. I opened my own door and slid into the driver's seat. I watched her vehicle pull out of the parking lot and merge into the heavy afternoon traffic. I placed my hands on the steering wheel. A profound sense of calm washed over my entire body. The Atlanta lawyers could file all the motions they wanted. They could threaten my doctor. They could rally the entire church congregation to call me insane. But as I watched Amber disappear down the street, I knew they had lost. I had just acquired a witness that no amount of money or social influence could ever buy. Sunday morning arrived with a stillness that felt entirely unnatural. It had been 4 days since Amber and I walked out of the police precinct. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in Lorraine Greer and her guest bedroom. I was 38 weeks pregnant. My belly was a heavy, solid drum pulling at my lower back. I reached for a navy blue cotton maternity dress. I did not put on any makeup. I did not attempt to curl my hair. I brushed it straight back and tied it at the nape of my neck. I looked at my reflection. The woman staring back at me no longer looked like a desperate orphan searching for a place to belong. She looked like a fortress. I picked up my purse, walked out to my car, and drove toward First Baptist Macon. I did not turn on the radio. The silence inside the vehicle was heavy and absolute. I drove through the familiar suburban streets, watching the majestic oak trees cast long, dark shadows across the manicured lawns. I turned onto the main avenue, just as the heavy brass bells in the church tower began to toll. It was 11:15 in the morning. The Sunday service had just concluded. I pulled my car into the massive asphalt parking lot. I did not park in the back near the overflow section. I drove straight toward the front entrance, pulling into a space located just a few yards away from the wide concrete steps. I turned off the engine. The heat radiating from the black asphalt was already beginning to warp the air above the hoods of the parked cars. I opened the door and pushed myself out of the driver's seat. My flat shoes hit the pavement with a quiet thud. I stood up straight, resting one hand on the roof of the car for balance, and looked toward the church. The heavy wooden doors were propped wide open. The congregation was pouring out into the bright Georgia sunlight. Men in tailored suits and women in bright pastel Sunday dresses clustered together in small groups. The air was filled with the sound of polite laughter, the rustle of expensive fabrics, and the overwhelming scent of floral perfumes mixing with the exhaust fumes of idling engines. I saw her almost immediately. Gloria was standing near the center of the largest group holding court exactly as she did every single week. She wore a pristine, pale peach dress that draped flawlessly over her figure. A delicate silk scarf was knotted elegantly around her neck. She was holding a leather-bound Bible in one hand, while her other hand rested gently on the arm of her oldest and dearest friend, Patty Lawson. Trent stood a few feet behind his mother, staring down at his expensive leather shoes. He looked pale and entirely miserable, a hollow shell of the man I had married. I took a breath that filled the very bottom of my lungs. I let go of the car roof. I began to walk toward them. The gravel and loose asphalt crunched loudly beneath my shoes. I did not rush. I walked with a slow, deliberate rhythm dictated by the weight of the child I was carrying. A woman in a yellow floral hat noticed me first. Her polite smile instantly vanished. She nudged her husband. He turned, saw me, and stopped speaking mid-sentence. The silence began to spread outward from that single point, rippling through the crowd like a stone dropped into a quiet pond. One by one, the members of the congregation turned their heads. The cheerful chatter died away, replaced by a thick, suffocating quiet. Gloria felt the shift in the atmosphere. She turned her head, her perfectly styled platinum hair catching the harsh sunlight. When her eyes locked onto mine, a micro-expression of pure venom flashed across her face. It was there for a fraction of a second before the maternal mask violently snapped back into place. She let go of Patty and her arm and took a step forward. She plastered a look of profound, devastating sorrow across her features. "Claire, sweetheart," Gloria called out. Her voice was loud, designed to project across the silent parking lot so every single person could hear her. "What in the world are you doing here? You should be resting in bed. You are in no condition to be out in the heat like this." I stopped walking. I stood exactly 4 feet away from her. The crowd of churchgoers had formed a loose circle around us, watching the spectacle unfold. They were waiting for me to scream. They were waiting for me to act like the hysterical, paranoid woman Gloria had meticulously described to them over the past 10 days. I did not raise my voice. I kept my tone incredibly flat and perfectly calm. "I am not here to attend the service, Gloria," I said. "I am here to tell you that the psychological evaluation you scheduled for me tomorrow morning has been permanently canceled." The peach fabric of her dress shifted slightly as her posture stiffened. She glanced quickly at Trent, but Trent refused to look up from the pavement. "Honey, you are not making any sense," Gloria said, stepping closer and reaching a hand out toward my shoulder. "You are having an episode. Let Trent take you home. We just want to get you the medical help you so desperately need." I did not step back. I looked at her outstretched hand, and then I looked directly into her eyes. "The judge dismissed your emergency petition at 8 o'clock yesterday evening," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent watching crowd. Your attorneys from Atlanta withdrew from the case entirely." Gloria froze. Her hand hovered in the empty space between us. A dark, ugly flush began to creep up her neck, settling into the fine lines around her mouth. The confidence that usually radiated from her pores suddenly faltered. She did not understand how I possessed this information. She did not understand why her expensive lawyers had abandoned her. "I do not know what kind of paranoid delusions you are feeding yourself now," Gloria whispered, her voice dropping to a harsh hiss meant only for my ears. "But you are making a massive fool of yourself in front of the entire church." "I am not the one who should be worried about the congregation," I replied. I shifted my gaze away from Gloria and looked directly at the woman standing right behind her. I looked at Patty Lawson. Patty was clutching her purse, her eyes darting nervously between me and her best friend. "Patty," I said clearly. Patty jumped slightly. "Yes, Claire. Did Amber tell you where she went on Wednesday morning?" I asked. The color drained entirely from Patty and her face. She looked deeply confused. "Amber, what does my daughter have to do with any of this?" Gloria snapped her head around to look at me. The maternal mask finally shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Real, unadulterated panic flooded her eyes. Her breathing turned shallow and rapid. She finally understood. She realized that the isolated pregnant girl she thought she had buried in paperwork had found the one person capable of burning her entire kingdom to the ground. Before Gloria could open her mouth to speak, the heavy, rhythmic sound of tires rolling over loose gravel echoed across the asphalt. Everyone in the parking lot turned their heads simultaneously. Two dark gray police cruisers pulled through the brick entrance of First Baptist Macon. They did not have their sirens blaring, but the bright red and blue lights mounted on their roofs were flashing wildly, slicing through the bright Sunday glare. The vehicles rolled to a stop right behind Gloria and her pristine sedan, effectively blocking the main exit of the parking lot. The doors of the lead cruiser opened. The silver-haired detective from the Bibb County Sheriff and his precinct stepped out into the heat. He wore the exact same rumpled gray suit he had worn during our interview. Two uniformed deputies stepped out of the second vehicle, their hands resting cautiously on their heavy leather utility belts. The congregation let out a collective gasp. Women pulled their children closer. Men took instinctive steps backward. The safe, respectable sanctuary of their Sunday morning had just been violently breached. The detective walked through the parted crowd. He did not look at the pastor. He did not look at the choir members. He walked straight toward the woman in the peach dress. "Gloria Hensley," the detective said. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute authority. Gloria trembled. The leather-bound Bible slipped from her fingers and hit the asphalt with a dull thud. She did not bend down to pick it up. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "Ma'am, I have a warrant for your arrest," the detective stated, clearly pulling a folded piece of paper from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. "You are being charged with 2 counts of aggravated battery against a pregnant person and 1 count of criminal conspiracy." The silence in the parking lot was completely shattered. A wave of shocked murmurs erupted from the crowd. Trent finally snapped out of his miserable trance. He rushed forward, throwing his hands up in a frantic gesture. "Wait, hold on," Trent shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "You cannot do this here. She is a grandmother. This is a church for God and His sake. We have legal representation." One of the uniformed deputies immediately stepped directly into Trent, and his path holding up a massive calloused hand. "Step back, sir. Do not interfere with a lawful arrest or you will be placed in the back of the vehicle with her." Trent stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the deputy, then looked at his mother, and just like the coward he had always been, Trent took 2 steps backward and lowered his head. He abandoned her the exact same way he had abandoned me. The detective looked at Gloria. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back, ma'am." Gloria did not move. She looked around at the faces of the people she had manipulated, charmed, and controlled for 15 years. She looked at the pastor, but the pastor was staring at the ground. She looked at the women she had baked casseroles for, but they were shielding their eyes in horror. Finally, she looked at Patty Lawson. Patty was trembling violently. The words the detective had spoken were finally connecting in her mind. She remembered her own daughter screaming in agony 14 months ago. She remembered the brown glass bottle of folic acid Gloria had personally delivered to the apartment. "Gloria," Patty gasped, her voice thick with absolute revulsion. "What did you do to my Amber?" Gloria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The brilliant, articulate woman who always had the perfect lie ready was entirely speechless. She had no power left. The audience she relied on to validate her existence was looking at her like she was a monster. The detective did not wait for an answer. He reached out, grabbed Gloria by her wrist, and firmly pulled her arms behind her back. The metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking into place echoed across the hot asphalt. It was the sharpest, heaviest, and most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. The deputies took hold of her arms and guided her toward the back of the waiting cruiser. The peach fabric of her dress wrinkled and bunched up awkwardly. They pressed a hand to the top of her perfectly styled platinum hair and pushed her into the back seat, slamming the heavy door shut behind her. The cruisers reversed, turned around, and drove slowly out of the parking lot. The red and blue lights faded into the distance. I stood in the exact same spot. I looked at Trent. He was a broken man, stripped of his mother, his marriage, and his reputation. I did not feel a single drop of pity. I turned my back on him, walked to my car, and drove away from First Baptist Macon for the very last time. 2 months later, the suffocating heat of the Georgia summer finally broke, giving way to the crisp, cool air of late October. I sat on the wide wooden porch of a small rental house located on the quiet side of town. The property did not have a perfectly manicured lawn, and the paint on the railing was slightly chipped, but the front door had a brand new deadbolt that only I possessed the key for. A gentle breeze blew through the branches of a massive oak tree in the front yard, sending a cascade of dry brown leaves drifting across the grass. I pushed my foot against the floorboards, keeping the heavy wooden rocking chair moving in a slow, steady rhythm. A soft, warm weight rested completely against my chest. I looked down at the tiny girl wrapped in a soft yellow blanket. Her eyes were closed, her breathing deep and even. She had a full head of dark hair and tiny, perfect fingers that were currently curled into tight little fists against my collarbone. I had named her Jean after the mother who had fought the world to keep me safe. The legal battles were entirely over. Lorraine Greer had dismantled Trent in the family court with the brutal efficiency of a military strike. Due to the fault-based filing, citing documented adultery and criminal conspiracy, Trent was barred from receiving a single dime of alimony. The judge awarded me absolute sole custody of Jean, a disproportionate share of the marital savings, and the full equity from the forced sale of the suburban house. Trent had moved into a cheap apartment near the highway. Amber had refused to ever speak to him again. As for Gloria, her pristine reputation had not saved her. When the district attorney officially combined my toxicology reports with Amber and her sworn testimony, the presiding judge deemed Gloria a severe flight risk and a danger to the community. She was denied bail. The woman who had obsessed over controlling every aspect of her environment was currently sitting in a concrete cell at the Bibb County Jail, wearing a standard orange jumpsuit awaiting a criminal trial that would likely end with her spending the rest of her natural life behind bars. I stopped rocking the chair. I placed my hand gently over the back of my daughter and her small head. For 2 years I had walked blindly through a marriage, desperately wanting a family so badly that I ignored every piece of evidence placed right in front of me. I had trusted the sweet tea, the casseroles, and the painted nursery walls. I had traded my own intuition for the illusion of being loved. I leaned down and pressed my lips against the soft, warm crown of Jean in her head. She stirred slightly, letting out a tiny sigh, and settled deeper against my chest. I did not need to search for a family anymore. I did not need to beg for a place at a dining room table filled with liars. I had built my own family. I had protected it with my own bare hands. And as I sat on the porch, listening to the wind rustling through the autumn leaves, I finally knew what absolute, unbreakable peace felt like. We all crave that perfect, seamless family dynamic. You spend your life absorbing stories that tell you exactly how a family should look and feel. You desperately want the Sunday dinners, the shared holidays, the mother-in-law who pulls you into a warm hug and treats you like her own flesh and blood. When you do not have a strong foundation of your own, the hunger for that kind of belonging can easily become a heavy blindfold. You want to believe the bright smiles are entirely genuine. You want to believe that the expensive gifts, the unsolicited advice, and the constant physical presence in your home are simply acts of profound, unconditional love. But the hardest and most vital lesson you will ever have to learn is that manipulation rarely looks like a monster in the dark. The most dangerous people in your life do not break down your front door to hurt you. They have a key because you handed it to them with a grateful smile. They wear pastel dresses and perfectly pressed clothes. They bake your favorite meals when you are tired. They sit in the front pew of the local church and smile sweetly at everyone they meet. They use their extreme generosity as a down payment on your absolute compliance. They decorate your house and buy your furniture not because they actually love you, but because they want to firmly establish ownership over the space where you live and breathe. When someone repeatedly crosses your physical or emotional boundaries and calls it love, they are systematically training you to accept their abuse. You have to learn to trust the quiet, persistent voice inside your own head, instead of the loud, polite expectations of your community. Society constantly pressures women to keep the peace, to smooth things over, and to blindly respect the older generation. But when a relationship requires you to constantly shrink yourself, to ignore your own deep discomfort, or to quietly swallow whatever is handed to you just to maintain a fake harmony, that is not a family, that is a beautifully decorated cage. True family does not demand your submission in exchange for their support. You must look closely at the hard evidence of how people actually behave behind closed doors, rather than the sweet, syrupy words they speak in public. If your environment feels wrong, if your gut is screaming that a dark truth is hiding beneath the pristine surface, you must investigate it. Do not let the terrifying fear of being entirely alone keep you sitting at a dinner table with people who are actively trying to destroy your future. Walking away from a poisonous family network, especially one disguised as a pillar of the community, is never a failure. It is the most courageous, life-saving choice you can ever make. It takes an incredible amount of strength to pack your bags, walk out the front door, and decide that you would rather build a quiet life entirely from scratch than live inside a comfortable lie. You are always capable of being your own sanctuary. Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship or a family dynamic that looked perfectly respectable to the outside world, but was quietly breaking your spirit on the inside? How did you finally find the undeniable strength to trust your own intuition and step out the door for good? Please share your story in the comments below, because your brave journey might be exactly what another woman desperately needs to hear today to finally save herself.